The following segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org, and we have an opportunity today to turn frustration into action. So we talk a lot about the homeless industrial complex, which I really think is a thing where you have these outside providers who are being funded with taxpayer money. There isn't proper oversight of the money that they're spending, of the outcomes that they're getting. The King County Regional Homelessness Authority is a prime example of that. And another area of government in King County that is starting to get just as much scrutiny has to do with juvenile diversion and the millions of dollars in taxpayer funds that have been given to outside entities to try to help youth who have found themselves wrapped up in the criminal justice system for various reasons. And there has been article after article after article about issues in that space. For instance, there was a recent article from the Seattle Times. The headline, "Finance Director of Seattle Nonprofits Pleads Guilty to Embezzling $3 million. This had to do with money that was being used for juvenile, or should have been used for juvenile diversion. There was also an article in KUOW. The headline, "King County Gave Millions to No New Youth Jail Activists to Help Kids and Then Looked Away." First of all, let me say about KUOW, this is a very progressive news outlet. And even they're acknowledging that King County, for the sake of race and social justice concerns, they're doling out millions in taxpayer funds to these people who are protesting, a new youth jail, and then just looking away and having virtually no accountability for how that money is spent. It's not as if these are some right-wing or conservative outlets that are raising red flags about the money being spent in this space. KUOW, the Seattle Times, and there have been countless articles like that. So an entity called the Citizen Action Defense Fund has sent a letter to the state auditor, Pat McCarthy, and is seeking multiple audits of the organizations that are working in this space. The letter is dated July 24th. It reads, on behalf of the Citizen Action Defense Fund, I write to request full financial and performance audits of the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. More specifically, I seek audits of the Juvenile Division and its administration of related community referral programs, including but not limited to Restorative Community Pathways, Cedars, Regional Peacekeepers Collective, Community Passageways, Creative Justice Northwest, Collective Justice Northwest, and Choose 180. So these are outside entities that are in receipt of taxpayer funds. The letter goes on to read, there is ample evidence of a lack of financial accountability for the programs listed above. These, and then it lists the articles. These articles detail troubling examples of financial mismanagement of millions of taxpayer dollars to nonprofits that are charged with little accountability. This poor administration of programs that are part of the juvenile justice system, given the serious nature of the offenses committed, has real consequences for public safety and the rights of crime victims in the region. We spoke with Jackson Maynard with the Citizen Action Defense Fund about this letter and the response that he got from the state auditor. Jackson Maynard, welcome to Undivided.
Thank you so much, Brandi. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast.
Yeah, an important issue. Before we dive into that, explain for folks what the Citizen Action Defense Fund is.
Yeah, we're a nonprofit litigation group. We engage in strategic litigation throughout the state, in Washington state. And basically, we take on government overreach. We sue on constitutional issues against the legislature, state agencies. Anytime they're violating the Constitution or the law and not playing by the rules that everybody else has to play by, we'll be there and we'll be raising issues.
And in the interest of full transparency, since I'm an ambassador for Future 42, it's fair to say that these two things are under the same umbrella, correct?
They are.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So let's talk about, it sounds like, I think when people request an audit, for instance, there might be one big glaring issue, something that cropped up. You're like, hey, now you need to look into this organization. But it seems like for our juvenile diversion programs, it's not one thing, it's a lot of things.
It is a lot of things. And I realize that talking about audits may not be the sexiest thing to sort of, go over in a podcast, but it's a really, really important issue because these are really, really important programs. And I can say that because I used to be a juvenile prosecutor. That was my first job out of law school. My first day, I went down and handled juvenile detention hearings in another state. So I've seen how these programs can work and how important the work of being a juvenile prosecutor is. So I have tremendous respect for it. But given the articles, and there have been several, we've attached 7 different articles that have come out really mostly in the last few weeks of problems in the King County Juvenile Division. It absolutely is really, really vital that I think the state auditor get to the bottom of what's going on, both financially and in terms of the management of these juvenile detention programs.
And as you mentioned, I mean, some of these articles go back to 2020 even. And are there any among them when it comes to mismanagement of funds or potential mismanagement of funds that to you is most concerning?
Yeah, it's the millions of dollars that have been allocated to these groups where there's little or no accountability for how they're handling the money. There's one article that talks about $28 million that, in the words of the article, has been lost or disappeared, which is not very comforting. And then another article lists 859,000 or more that was lost by the executive director of an organization that spent the money on her mortgage, vacations, and in casinos. And when pressed on that issue, claimed that some of the diversion programs had taken place at the casinos, which I think even that got laughed off. But a lot of these groups are resisting any efforts at transparency. One of the articles mentions on the website of one of them that they said they do not view the county as an ally, even though they're taking money from the county, and that any efforts at transparency they don't feel are necessary. And these are public funds. This is public money going to these programs. So the financial aspect of this is absolutely something that the auditor should look into.
Yeah, before I get to the auditor's response to the letter that you sent, I'm just going to be blunt in this question. Do you think that some of the hesitancy to dive into misappropriation of funds in these instances has to do with the fact that these funds were allocated sometimes for issues related to equity and race?
I think that could be a factor. Obviously, the auditor and the folks running those programs can speak to that. I think that certainly the relationship between race and the criminal justice system, I think there are valid questions that could be raised, especially when you look at the disproportionate impact of the criminal justice system on certain racial groups. That said, I look at this also being a former prosecutor from a victim's perspective, and I can also tell you that the victims of crimes tend to be disproportionately people who are people of color, and they deserve justice just as much as anyone else. And I think that sort of gets lost in some of these questions. They're not going to be able to afford to hire a lawyer. Their chance to get restitution really lies with the prosecutor's office, and their access to the justice system is really supposed to be through prosecutors and the police. And so, I think you have to balance that. But I definitely think that there could be a political dynamic to what's going on, and just sort of a sense that the current justice system isn't working, and therefore we just need to try this new direction. The problem is that's clearly not working either, and you can't toss the baby out with the bathwater. And you've got to make sure that your crime victims have access to the system. There are judges that are shut out, and there are even juvenile probation officers as well that are shut out when the prosecutor's office just outsources its entire diversion program, to these outside groups. There has to be some element of accountability as well, and I think that gets lost in the mix.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that question is not to be divisive or something, but we saw a lot of this in 2020, during the Summer of Love in Seattle, as the former mayor called it, where they would almost throw money at some of these organizations that had to do with race and social justice, and we saw that problem repeatedly, that the money wasn't being well accounted for, or there wasn't really a justification for giving those funds to the organizations that they were given to. And so I wonder sometimes if there's the same level of scrutiny when there is maybe a political bend to the money being dished out. So you wrote a letter to the auditor, and you did get a response, correct?
I did. And to her credit, she responded, within just a couple of days. So I certainly appreciated her taking the time early on to respond, in a quick manner to my request. The problem was the way she responded, I don't think is going to address the concerns.
How so? Characterize her response for us.
Well, what we were very specific in the types of audits we requested. We wanted financial audits so that you can go through the books of these nonprofits to see how they're spending the money and the money that has been disappeared or lost, so that they can track that down. And we asked for performance audits, and that really gets to the element of are these working? Are these programs really doing what they're designed to do? Um, we hadn't really talked about it, but there's one article that says 50% of the kids referred to these programs don't even show up. And for the ones that do, they're basically given tutoring, counseling, a 4-hour class. And in one article, it indicated that they received cupping, which I think is like some part of massage therapy, but it's not the level of accountability that really you should have in these types of programs. So are they effective? Are they working? That's what a performance audit will help you to know. She responded back that, well, what we're going to do is an accountability audit of King County, and they do these regularly scheduled audits. They're kind of every couple years. And she said, well, we'll take a look at that issue, at this issue with that accountability audit. And the problem with that accountability audit sounds great, but if you look at the last one and you read it, which I took the trouble of doing, they basically look at the transactions that the local government does and make sure that, yes, they're paying X and X went to Y, but they don't really dig into, they would not, for instance, look at the nonprofits themselves that have received the money. They're just going to look at the local government. It's also going to take some time. They're not going to complete the audit till next spring. And then based on when the last audit was available, we won't even have those results for another year until the spring of 2025. That is too long to wait when you're dealing with victims of crime, their families, when you're dealing with juveniles who are apparently not being properly held accountable through the system. We need to get answers quicker. And you talk about the politics. This is why we have a state auditor. It's so that they can pierce through sort of the local politics of a local government and make sure that they're keeping the taxpayers and the good of the state in mind, and in making sure that somebody's minding the store. We've had a state auditor since 1889, and I think the good question is not whether she should order an audit. It's why has she not done a performance and financial audit already in light of the media attention to this issue?
And have you thought about an answer to that question?
Well, I think the ball's in her court. I certainly want to, give her the opportunity to respond. I did say, look, we need you to address the concerns we've laid out about why an accountability audit won't work. And I'm hopeful that she will do that. Again, prosecutors have a tremendous amount of discretion. I get that. And I think she's trying to allow some space for the King County Prosecutor's Office to have that discretion. But, speaking as a former prosecutor, that discretion is not unlimited. They're still constrained by the law. And they still need to make sure that what they're doing complies with the law. They can't just create their own criminal justice system in King County. And I really feel like if she takes the time and does the types of audits we've requested, not only will she provide some needed transparency to these programs, but also they'll be able to make some changes that I think will hopefully help people reduce crimes, hold juveniles accountable, and get some victims some closure as well.
Yeah, and I think you've made the case throughout the interview, but if you could just drive it home, regardless of the political leanings of people who are watching, regardless of how they feel about youth jail and juvenile detention, why is it so critical to make sure that we know and can account for all this money and the outcomes of that money?
Well, it's a public trust. The fact that is when the public gives funds to their elected representatives, they deserve to know that money is being used wisely. And that's, again, why we have a state auditor to make sure that that's happening. I guess I would also add, again, I've seen how these programs can work. And with juveniles in particular, there really is a window that you've got to get their attention. And for some of them, if they're nonviolent and maybe first-time offenders, these type of diversion programs can be effective. But if what they're doing is they're just throwing money at these groups and the juveniles are not being held accountable, then what you're going to have is a bad crime problem that just gets worse. And that's not going to work. I will say too that this issue was brought to my attention by a family member of someone who was a minor victim of a very, very serious crime in King County. I'd rather not go into specifics about it, but this family member was the person that said, in light of their experience, you really need to look at what's going on at King County. And that started me down the road of looking at the articles. So these are real people that are affected, real families and real victims. And I really believe some changes need to be made.
Yeah, and I think you made a great point in there, and that's that I think we're all in agreement that for juvenile offenders, if there's an opportunity to help set them on a better path, we all want that. But that has to mean that we make sure that the diversion they're getting is somewhat effective. It's not weird cupping massage therapy or whatever it is. I mean, that should be something that we can agree with regardless of our political leanings. Let's end with this, Jackson. Is there a call to action here if folks are hearing this and they're frustrated by it? Is there anything that they could do to help this along?
There is. Yeah, we're just asking them, and you can, check our website, but if you could reach out to the state auditor and ask her to do a financial and performance audit, a real audit of these programs, I think that would really help as she's weighing how to proceed. And so we're just asking folks if they're interested in this to reach out to her and let her know their opinion on that.
All right, we'll get our viewers and listeners on it. Jackson Maynard, Executive Director of the Citizen Action Defense Fund. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Brandi. I really appreciate the time.
And again, that kind of stuff shouldn't be controversial. I mean, regardless of where you are politically, wanting to make sure that the money that you're giving to the government, the hard-earned money the government is taking from you, is actually being spent to good effect. And if you care about, even if you are on the far left side when it comes to whether juveniles who commit serious crimes should be incarcerated or if they should get a slap on the wrist, making sure that there are programs that are actually effective in ensuring that they don't commit crimes again and ensuring that they stay on a better path. In order to do that, you have to make sure that the money being given to these programs is actually being used to do just that. So again, it should be non-controversial. So we will share and continue to share the email for the state auditor's office. You can email or call the office to make sure that they follow through with this, because again, I think it's very non-controversial. So thank you again to Jackson Maynard and the Citizen Action Defense Fund for taking the lead on this. And that segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org.